Hello and welcome to part 3 of our little downhill jam racing game. We did a basic race manager. We have a timer, very simple timer. And now all we have left is some UI things left to do and maybe a countdown timer as well. We'll see. So we're going to do a UI system. So there are sort of two main elements of our UI system, as our to-do list is indicating for us. One is managing the sort of state of the UI from a very broad top level. What is on screen? Game over, heads up display, lose, win, whatever. And then the other is how can we get the right information into those components? And there are lots of techniques for doing that in more elegant ways than we're going to do in this project, but the way we're going to do sort of that top level, like which panel is open, I think is going to be a pretty clever and very reusable solution, and things that I have used in professional game projects. And it's just, this is, I'm not teaching, we're largely in like kind of hypothetical project land, but a lot of these are fundamentally a lot of the concepts that we'll be using all the time. So let's make a canvas and let's sort of test out our UI. If you haven't worked much with the UI system, I'll try to make sure I'm talking through everything I'm doing, and we're going to keep it very simple. It's not going to look good, which is fine, because I know that some of the students here have not used Canvas or UI all that much, and it's very confusing, and you gotta spend time with it. So under UI, we're going to add canvas. And then inside of the canvas, right-click on that, we're going to add a panel. And panel is going to sort of be our parent object. We could have empty parent objects for all of our panels, for the sorry about the noise, for the HUD, for the time up, and for the you did it. But we're going to just do, instead of empty game objects, we're just going to do panels. So this will be the HUD panel. So the reason for that, let me just close that here, is that the panel gives us a background image, which makes it very easy and convenient for me to preview sort of the size and location of everything. And then I can just turn off and delete that image anyway. So when I make empty objects in the canvas, I tend to make panels and then use this to help me ballpark and preview how everything is actually working. And like, okay, so this panel's away from the left edge of the screen or whatever, which is nice. So I'm going to make a HUD panel, Control D to duplicate that for a time up panel, and Control D to duplicate that for a again, I keep saying you win, but you haven't necessarily won a race. It's, at finish. And if we need a countdown panel, we'll add that after. So on the canvas itself, we are going to add the UI manager. And the UI manager is going to be responsible for enabling and disabling all of the different panels. And it's going to talk to the race manager. So we're going to have our UI system, and we're going to have it be sort of in charge of our race manager, and we're going to have this sort of clean separation of the project, where all the UI stuff is going to be sort of only dependent and only talking to other UI things, and outside of the UI system, other systems will only talk to this one UI manager. So we're sort of going to leave this one component to be sort of in charge of everything. And that's going to add some complications to how we update the timer, but it's going to keep the architecture of everything very clean, to the point where I can just like add and delete the canvas, like from prefab maybe, and it'll just work. And if we delete it, it'll just won't be there and nothing else will break. And that's truly the goal, to keep it like compartmentalized in that way. So we're going to make a new folder, and you just start seeing a pattern here. The different systems that are all dependent on each other, but don't really deal with the other systems, kind of get their own folders in our project. So we'll make a UI folder, and I'm going to make a UI manager. I'm going to call it UI Panel Manager. UI Panel Manager. Great. And this will be a mono behavior. So the UI Panel Manager will talk to the race manager, and it will get the race state. And it will look at the race state and use that to determine what other elements are enabled or disabled. Which children to turn on and off, basically. And we'll do that in update. So what does that look like in practice? We're going to change this code in a moment. We're going to refactor, but let's take a look at like the most broad version of this pattern. We're going to have game objects for our panels. And that's going to be a game object, and that's going to be a HUD panel and a time up panel and a finish panel. And then in update, we will take each panel and enable or disable it according to the race state. So this will be true or false. So I'll just set it to be true or false every single frame, which is bad, but because I know I'm about to refactor it, then I don't care. I'm about to rewrite this code. So should allow us to see sort of the logic of what's happening. So then in my canvas, I will add a UI panel manager, and then I will reference the race manager here. Bam. And then I will drag my hierarchy over here. I will drag my HUD. I want my HUD to HUD, time up to time up, and finish to finish. There we go. So now when I hit play in my hierarchy, I should see, first they should all be turned off. When we're a countdown, then in start, the HUD panel should appear. And then if I don't do anything for 3 seconds, or whatever my time is set to, because these are all set to the same state. You probably saw that and then copied me, just like, this doesn't seem right to me. You were right. It was wrong. Believe in yourself. So now when I hit play, only one should appear. Come on. We're in the HUD panel. And now we're in the time up panel as time has gone up. Great. So that's the basic strategy. There's a few optimizations we want to do. One, I don't want to be calling this function all of the time. I only want to call it when it changes. So I'm going to make a private race state variable, and I'm going to call it displayed race state. And then I'm only going to update the race state when the race state has changed. So if the displayed race state is not equal to the race manager.get race state, then I will change that and update the currently displayed one. So then it's racing. We just check this Boolean and then skip it most of the time. And only when this changes will this change. We just have to make sure that this is going to be set to some, like on awake, it's going to be set to something that the race manager isn't, so that it gets called the first frame. What we would actually do is we'd pull this into another function and then just call it manually on start, and then we wouldn't worry about having some debug race state. Again, I'm going to rewrite some of this code in a moment, so we're going to hold off on that. But at the very least, we know we can only update the UI when we need to. Okay. So now if I've been successful, let's make the time up panel like yellow or something. Now if I have been successful, it should be white because of the HUD panel. And then when 3 seconds pass, it should just turn yellow. Just like before, we didn't change any of the logic from before. So let's find out. And there we go. When a panel turns on or off, we want to control that. Because when my panel is activated, when it is enabled, I want to change how I display the content. For example, maybe when my HUD with my timer and my speedometer is deactivated, they'll still be visible on screen and they'll just like become grayscale. And maybe my time up, when I want to activate it, instead of just like instantly having it just appear, I want it to animate in. I want it to go whoosh. You can quote me on that, whoosh, and fly in and animate. So I really want the panels to be responsible for themselves in terms of how they get turned on and off. And turning them off, if I want them to animate out or slide out of the way, that means I can't just set them to be deactivated immediately. So this won't work. If I want them to animate out or play a sound effect that finishes playing and that audio source is on a game object, if I deactivate it, it's instantly gone. And that's not what we want. We can't work that way. So we're going to make a new component, a new Unity script, and we're going to call this a UI panel. And the UI panel is going to be responsible for how it turns itself on and off. So it's going to have a function for turning itself on and off. Public void set panel active. Keep in mind that you shouldn't use set active because it's like already a thing. So we'll say set panel active, bool active. And maybe the default behavior will be to turn itself on or off. And then here, instead of keeping track of the UI panel, instead of keeping track of just game objects that we turn on and off, we're going to keep track of UI panel. It is using a namespace that I would love to use. Maybe I should have committed to using namespaces in this project. So we'll change that to UI panel. We'll change this to set panel active, which is not the game object set active function, but is our UI panel's set panel active function. And I will refactor this out into a function called update panels to state. And then we'll write that function, update panels to state. And then here we'll pass that in as an argument. So, and then here we'll take array state, display state. Okay. That's kind of a weird order of operations on the copying and pasting, but I basically said, I just want a function where I can say, hey, look like this state. When you start the game, look like this. And then it updates. We may not want to use ray state. We may want to have some other options like all off, which like isn't something you'd have in the ray state. But now it's time to figure out why we did any of this in the first place. So first, let's test it, make sure it works, because it won't. My canvas here has type mismatches. It has empty references, and my panels here, none of them have the UI panel component. So let's add the UI panel to all three of these components, and then here my HUD. We'll get the HUD, my time up will get the time up, and my finish line will get the finish line. And if I'm successful, then I've accomplished nothing. I've got the HUD open, I do nothing, I'm at time up. Great, it works. Let's get the text on the screen. So to do that, we are going to extend UI panel and make a new version of UI panel that's going to update some text with the text from the race manager. So to do that, we'll have to do two things. One, we'll have to make a new class that extends this, that knows what TextMesh Pro text component to update. And two, it'll need to know the timer. So to know the timer, it's going to need to know this race manager so it can talk to it and get the timer data from that. And our UI panel manager already has the race manager, and it already knows the HUD panel. So it can do a little fancy code pattern called dependency injection. So because we know that the HUD panel manager, like all UI panels should be children of a UI panel manager, we can get away with doing some things that might feel a little sloppy in terms of interdependencies. Because right now the dependencies that the UI panel manager needs to know about the UI panels, and the UI panel is going to need to know about the UI panel manager as well. It's going to need a reference to the panel manager. And we are going to set that panel manager in a initiate function. Initiate, and we're going to take a UI panel manager, my manager. Somebody tell me who my mom is. It's weird. We're going to take the panel manager and set it equal to my manager. And I'm going to rename that just to manager. So we have initiate. So in UI panel manager, in awake, we will take each of these panels and then initiate them, and I will inject the dependency. Call it this. And the reason that this, what I don't want is in Unity is to have to drag a reference two ways. I don't want to be, I go to the UI panel and say, you drag and drop the race manager or the panel manager. I don't want to be on the panel manager and say, and you drag and drop and do the UI manager. Because once we mess that up, tons of bugs, all sorts of problems all over the place. We have like an interdependency, which is already gross, but now we have we think we have an interdependency and then it's wrong and we've dragged and dropped incorrectly and it's now super broken. So here in Unity, the way it's set up, why did I move to this monitor? The way it's set up in Unity is that the race manager has the HUDs and it just sets them all up via code and it'll just work. And the panels are just, they know their manager and they just have that reference and we can't mess it up in the editor. We could put the wrong thing here, but we're injecting that reference. So we have a lot of confidence that it's going to be correctly set up. Because we are building it in a way where it can't be incorrectly set up. So now I can get the panel manager and I can talk to it to figure out what the timer is. And then when I have the timer, I can get the amount of time left and I can put that into some text component. Amazing. So now back to the object-oriented lesson. We are going to make a new type of UI panel, which is going to be our HUD panel. So let's make a new Unity script, and we're going to call it UI because we're going to use this prefix for all of these scripts. HUD for heads-up display, and then panel. We're going to use the same suffix for all of our UI panels. And it's going to inherit from the UI panel. Great. And now, to update the text, we're going to need to add TextMesh Pro. So let's do that in a second. We're also going to need to change this from private to something else, but we'll get there. So back to Unity, let's add TextMesh Pro, which is going to need to import. Oh my gosh, this is going slow. I'm going to restart the editor real quick. All right, after a quick restart, we can now add our HUD panel instead of this UI panel. So let's get rid of the UI panel from our HUD panel, and let's add UI HUD panel. And then we'll have to go back to that canvas and see this is missing. But because of polymorphism, because we can now drag and drop that, and our UI HUD panel can go where it's asking for any UI panel. How nice is that? Okay, TextMesh Pro time. In our HUD panel, we're going to get rid of that image. Let's change the rect transform this here. Let's just have it be across the top. So we'll choose this little preset here. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key and click on that. And what that's going to do is it's going to change my anchors here. So click on that, hold down Alt, click on that. And now my Y position is sort of correctly, 0 is going to be at the right place. Is that right? Hold on, did I do it right? No, I don't want that. I want change my anchors, but I wanted to change my pivot. Haha. To 1. And then my Y is 0. Haha. Okay. Sorry. Well, I want this dot, which is the actual position that we're setting. I want this to be at the top. And that's going to be my pivot here. That needs to be at 1. And then now, I just think it makes sense for this Y position to be 0. And then my height is my visible height on screen, and it's good. Okay, so that's going to be just across the top, and that's my HUD. And then we're going to add a new child object, UI Text Mesh Pro, and then it's going to ask me to import Text Mesh Pro Essentials, which I will gladly do because I need a font and some other junk. Fine. Great. And this is going to be our countdown text. So let's give it some placeholder text. Turn off this panel. And then in my countdown text, we'll make that font bigger, not that big. And we'll center it. It should center it up by here. And bold. That's fine. Perfect. It's beautiful. It's like a good, like I really want that like arcade game, like gradient with like a drop shadow and all that stuff. And we can do some of that with Text Mesh Pro, but not in this video. Do that later. Okay. So our HUD panel, we need to get our reference from the race manager to get the timer, and we need to get the Text Mesh Pro text component. So let's get the Text Mesh Pro text component with a TMP underscore text. And now that we know about polymorphism, this TMP text is the base class of 2 different text components that Text Mesh Pro has, one for the UI, one for world meshes, I believe. So there we go. And we'll call that text. And we'll let that be serialized because we can just drag and drop it in the inspector. We could do like a get component in children, but I imagine having lots of Text Mesh Pro components for different things in the HUD, like different numbers and stuff that appear. So we'll just drag and drop it manually. This one will be the countdown. In this project, it's so simple, it will only have one element, but it's fine. In update, and remember that like this object just turns itself on and off because the UI panel just sets active, when it's off. So when it doesn't need to be rendering, the update function won't get called. So we can just do our logic and update and it'll just work. All we need to do is set the text component equal to some value. So some value. So first we need to get the panel manager. Then we need to get the timer from the panel manager. And then in the timer, we want to get the amount of time left. So first we got to get the panel manager. Sorry, I missed a step. First we got to get the panel manager. Then from the panel manager, we got to get the race manager. And then from the race manager, we got to get the timer. And then from the timer, we got to get the amount of time left. Incredible. This is private, but let's change that to protected. Private will not be accessible by the UI HUD. If I typed panel manager, it would throw an error that it is, well, it's a different error, but it would throw an error that it's like cannot access protected member or whatever it would say. And then here, I want to get the race manager. I can't do that yet. So in the UI panel manager, this private race manager, I need a public race manager. And the way we know how to do a private set and a public get is with our current knowledge, is a public function that returns a race manager called get race manager, and it will return race manager. There's another syntax where we could do that instead of a function. We could write public race manager, and then do this like auto body property. It's really nice. And then we just UI manager dot. Oh, it's so good. Okay, well, we've learned about public getter functions, so we're going to use that. So now we can do get race manager. Now I just need to get the timer. So I need a get race timer function, which I do sure wish existed. Copy. Race manager. Public timer. Paste. Get race timer. Return. Correct timer. Amazing. And then now the timer, we actually don't have any way to get the amount of time. So let's go to the timer and explore that. We have a float. We could do a public get time left as a float, but I actually want to go one step further, which is to turn it from a float, which would be like 1.2222222 to, and like, I want to round it down to just the integer, right? So we'll make a public string and we'll call it get time left in seconds. And we will return, and then we'll do some kind of rounding or some kind of like simplification to return this timer.toString, which will convert the float to a string. So now, oh my gosh, check this out. We are a HUD panel, and our parent has a panel manager, and that has a reference to the race manager, and that has a reference to its internal timer, and that has its reference to its time left in systems. So what we've done a little path where we have one system here, UI, and some, child of it, the HUD, which is part of a panel, which uses the UI, and we have some other system, which is the race manager, and it has this timer thing. And instead of going directly across to talk to the thing that I need, we're sort of taking this trip up, over, and down, which is sort of this long trip here in this line of code. And the reason we're doing that is we can draw some Venn diagrams here around my systems, around my multiple systems, I want to have my interfaces for these systems sort of just be this one connection. And I'm minimizing the dependencies I have between systems. And I'm allowing my systems internally maybe to be more complicated. This has to reference some text and stuff like that. But between my different systems, it's all kind of very clean and simple. So we have to choose to put complexity in the appropriate places and to minimize complexity where we don't want it. And that's sort of a design decision we do. And the way I do it is by sketching little bubbles on a tiny whiteboard or even on Post-it notes, like very small scale, just thinking things through. Making sure I don't have spaghetti code where everything's talking to everything. Because it's so painful to change and refactor anything. Here I could replace my UI system with a completely different UI system, and I probably wouldn't have to write much other code or touch many things that are outside of the UI system. It's pretty good. So let's try this. My Text Mesh Pro needs a reference to that text, and let's go ahead and rename that to be race timer text. And my HUD panel gets that. And if I hit play, I should see that long float with all the decimals. There it is. Boom. Great. So I want this time left to be in seconds, so I need to round it. And I can do that with a function called round. But this won't work because it will round, it'll hit 0 once I get below 0.5, and then I'll still have half a second left and it'll say 0 on screen. So it's 0, half a second, and then it times up. So I don't want to round it, I want to round it up. I want it to say 1, even if there's only 0.001 seconds left, I want it to say 1, and if I see the number 0 appear, that's time up. So instead of rounding it, I want to do a seal, S-E-I-L, which is short for ceiling, which is literally like floor and ceiling of a room. So you round it, think of a number as like a position of an elevator, right? I want to go to the floor above me. I want to go to that whole integer value. I want to round it up. And that's going to be .toString. The problem with this is that we're not going to get any decimals. This is going to be whole seconds. And that for me is fine. But let's say I wanted 1/10 place. I would multiply the value by 10, round it, and then divide that by 10 to move my decimal point over, round it, move my decimal point back. And I can multiply it by 100 to get 2 decimal points, and so on. So pretty common function. A lot of people write sort of wrapper functions to sort of do these kind of like round to this many decimals. In fact, the toString function can actually do everything that we said. Great, so now 0 never appeared. Because the second was 0, we switched to the time up HUD panel, which is great. Cool. We're basically done with any of our coding. Is that true? No, it's not, because I want that whoosh. Remember the whoosh? We love the whoosh. So we're going to, mostly for the sake of like having different types of objects that inherit from panel, we're going to add another type of object that inherits from UI panel. And this one is going to actually override that set panel active function to do its own thing. And that's going to be the time up. So I'm going to change, I'm going to make a new script. And I'm going to call it UI time up panel. Again, UI, because all my UI prefixes with UI, and then all my panel suffixes with panel. And it's going to be a UI panel. Give it that namespace, even though we love it. And then now I want to override my UI panel's set panel active function. I want to sort of replace that with my own. So I need to make this virtual. I need to add that virtual keyword, which I hadn't needed yet. So now in my panel manager, my UI timeup panel, I can type override set panel active. And here I won't call the base.setPanelActive function. So now this timeup panel should be like, if we leave it on or off or whatever, it'll just do nothing. It's just going to be on the whole time. And it got turned off. Why did it get turned off? Because I did not, it's still a UI panel component. I can't just name a game object optimistically. I have to actually update the code. Oh, who could have thought? Remove that. UI timeup panel for my timeup panel. Go back to the canvas, drag it over there. And now, as far as the panel manager is concerned, these are just panels. But as far as we're concerned, we've got, a HUD panel, a timeup panel, and a normal panel all right there. So now when I hit play, the timeup panel is active. And if we go to some other state like finish, timeup panel still active. That is because it is not controlling itself. We have not written any logic for it to do anything yet. We've overridden the parent, but we have not called that, base.setActive function. So the parent class turns the game object on and off. We've said, no, I do something else. I do something different. And what is it going to do that's different? Animation. Oh, that's right. Right now, after we're mostly done with all of our code, we have one line of code to write. I'm going to spend 15 minutes introducing an entire new Unity system that you may or may not have ever used before, but will probably, certainly, maybe, perhaps want to use in the future. So don't worry, I'm going to go slow and show you all the different steps to setting up an animator and all the animation states, because it's a good system to have been exposed to before you went to learn it. If that makes sense. I'm sort of, we're just splashing our face with water of this animation system to familiarize ourselves a little bit, even though we don't really know how it works. And then later we'll sit down to properly learn it and really get into it. And it'll be just that much easier because you'll be more familiar with what the different vocab terms mean. This is that, this is that. So I'm going to give a very quick, brief, perhaps too quick and too brief introduction to setting up an animation system, just to animate this one panel in and out. So step one is the fun thing. We're gonna make it look good. So I'm gonna get rid of the image. I'm gonna just uncheck that. And we'll just get rid of that component. And I'm gonna add a child Text Mesh Pro component. And we're gonna time up. We'll center it. And we'll make it nice and big. We'll make it 500 by 200. Yeah, something like that. Just make it nice and big. Scroll up that font size. We'll make it italics. It's an arcade game. Everything was italicized. Okay. So this is our time up panel. And we're going to have it scale in and move onto screen. We could even have it swirl onto screen. We can do all sorts of stuff. And the thing that's going to control that is Unity's animation system. So let's open up the animation window and discover a timeline, which will be neat to have. I'll close that for now. We'll be able to sort of double click on things and have that automatically open. But Unity does have the ability to set keyframes and move objects around. It also, in the animation system, has an animator. And this is a grid. But what this window allows me to edit is a flowchart. And the flowchart controls what animation state should I be in, and how can I merge these states together. If I have a running state and a walking state, when I go from walking to running, I don't want to like snap into position. I want to kind of like blend into position. Okay, so we're going to make a new folder, and we're going to call it animation, obviously. And then in the animation folder, we're going to make another folder for UI, because we might have all sorts of other animations and other systems that are getting animated. So I've made an animation folder. Inside of that folder, I'm going to make a UI folder, just for all of the animation related things that deal with specifically UI. We could have all sorts of things in this project animating. Let's stick to just one. So in order to make the animation, we need to make specific animation clips that are going to be, the game objects are going to sort of play these clips. That's going to be our sliding in and instantly vanishing. Clips can be like instant, that's fine. And we need to make the flowchart that can move us between them. So first, let's start with the flowchart. That is an animator controller. And I'm going to call this the time up panel anim controller. Time up panel anim controller. Nice. I think I got a typo in here. There we go. And now when I have that selected, my animator window that I opened under Window Animation Animator has given me sort of these bubbles. So this is my flowchart. So what are all of the conceptual states that my time up panel can be in? Well, it can be on or off, and that's basically it. So I'm going to right click in this grid. I'm going to choose create state empty, and I'm going to right click in this grid, create state empty, and I have made two states. The first one I made became the default state. I can right click and set defaults as I like. And the other one is just kind of there. New state 0, terrible names. Let's click on the orange one that has been set to the default, and let's call this hidden. And let's go to the new state, and let's call this visible. I know, incredible. Great. So now we need some way to move from hidden to visible. So I'm going to right click on hidden and make a transition. Transitions, we have to explicitly tell the system, like all the lines between our flowchart, like what is connected to what. So I'm going to right click and make a transition from hidden to visible. And I'm going to right click and make a transition from visible back to hidden. So I have two transitions, and I can select these transitions, and I have settings for them as well. Great. That's about as much as we can do over here. Next, I have to go to on my left, I have a layers panel. We're not going to use that at all. We're going to go to parameters. Parameters are sort of how all of the systems that are elsewhere in our project talk to the animator. So they set parameters, and then the transitions look at those parameters in order to determine when to move. So we're going to make a new parameter of type bool, and we're going to call it is visible. And I always do camel case, lowercase camel case, Pascal case, for my animator parameters, just so I don't forget. I just do it the same every time. So now when I'm hidden, I want to look at that is visible thing, and if it is visible, I want to leave the hidden state and go to the visible state. So let me click on the arrow that is from hidden to visible, and on the right I have conditions. When should I leave the hidden state and go to the visible state? I should do that when is visible is set to true. I'm going to click on the transition from visible to hidden, and I'm going to add a little plus button under these conditions for this transition. When should I go from the visible state to the hidden state? I should do that when is visible is set to false. Great. I'm going to uncheck has exit time on both of these transitions for reasons. Do we have to wait for an animation to complete before transitioning? And no, we can do it instantly. So if I go into play mode, nothing should happen because I have yet to add an animator to a game object. Leave play mode. On my time up panel, I'm going to add a component called an animator. Not animation, an animator. And the animator is going to look at our flowchart definition we've created and make a copy of it that is unique to this game object. And then it's going to modify settings of this game object. It can modify sort of the position or maybe the scale of the object, or whatever whatever our animation says to modify. where did I go? The animator is the one that will, sort of keep its own copy of these, keep its own copy of the parameters. Just use this as a reference. When we can update the parameters of the animator, set it to be visible, and it will update and animate through and do all the stuff that makes the animation happen, which we've yet to create. But now that I have added it, I can test it in the inspector. So I can go into play mode, and I can see that now hidden is sort of playing through this loop. It's looping the animation. And if I click this is visible checkbox, I instantly transition. And now this is the state that's looping. And if I uncheck it, I'm in this state. Cool. Those states don't currently do anything, but I do have a variable I can update to control what state is playing the animation. So now it's time to make those animations. Those are going to be these motion properties that these states have. And these are assets that we can make in Unity, that we can import from animations and other 3D modeling software, that we can, like if you have an FBX with animations or Mixamo, like you would get something that would import as that. But we can also just make them ourselves. So I can right click in my project window. I'm going to stay in this folder and I'm going to create an animation. And I'm going to call it time up visible. And I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to rename the duplication one to time up hidden. And what do I want my animation to be? Do I want it to be just like whoosh from 0 out? That seems good to me. So let's add these animations, these motions to our states. So on hidden, I want to click that little box. I have a bunch. I have a private naming convention, which makes it all good. I did spaces inconsistently. That's going to bother me. But on hidden, I'll say I'm hidden. On visible, I'll say I'm visible. Great. So I'm going to double click on that. And hey, look at that. That timeline window appeared. And if I collect a panel, it did just change which one of these is visible, by the way. Like if I double click on visible and then click on this panel, it sort of reopened the panel with the some arbitrary, like maybe alphabetical first one selected. So you got to watch out for that. It trips me up all the time. Clicking on a game object with an animator will set the animation window to like show you the different states that it has referenced by the different motions that it has referenced by a state in the animator that we have selected. Ugh, what a sentence. Gross. Unity's pretty annoying. So we are going to change the scale of the text mesh pro component. We're going to go from 0, 0, 0 up to 1, 1, 1. We're just going to whoop, pew, fly in. So in my hidden state, I'm going to click add property, and I can go to the child object of the child, the rect transform, and I can add the scale property. And I actually only need one keyframe. I can delete this second keyframe and go to the first keyframe and set it to be 0, 0, 0. That's one way to do it. That's not the way I almost ever do it. I find this menu awful to work with. The way I normally do it is I click this record button, enable disable keyframe recording mode. I put the keyframe timeline where I want it to be. I hit record. I go to the child object, and then I change the properties that I care about. And then I leave record mode, and I move the playhead, and I enter record mode, and I change it again. Here, we're only going to have one keyframe, because whenever we become hidden, I want it to hide instantly. And it will be, its scale will be 0, 0, 0. Close that. Next, well, I don't want to close that. I want to open that again, don't I? I want to do the visible state, which is over here. So click on that panel. Oh, look, hidden got selected. Change that to visible. And let's go to record. Let's go to that Text Mesh Pro. Let's set that to start at 0, 0, 0. And let's move my playhead forward some amount of time. I'll adjust this in a moment. And I'll go to the scale and I'll change it to 1, 1, 1. And now I can leave record mode. You want to remember to leave the record mode. And I can sort of scrub and I can test that. This looks like it's a 0.2 of a second. Let's take, I don't know. Let's do that. Nice. Great. If we want to be even fancier, we can change our curves here. And I can zoom in properly. And if you've done animation before, you might discover like, oh, let's have it like all three values, not just the X value. to, oh my gosh. I want it to go overshoot and then kind of come back. Whatever. Anyway, you can edit the animation into your heart's content using all sorts of skills and knowledge that will come from learning about animations and be transferable in and out of software like Blender. And Blender has a timeline that works the same way, and it's defined. I don't care. For now, I just want to test it. So to test it, we're going to go into play mode. We're going to select our time up panel. And then we're going to go to this is visible parameter, and we're going to check it. And then it came in. You might see it looping. That is a property of the motion. If you have this checkbox here, if time up visible was looping by default, it would loop, which is like often what we want in animations. But in our case, we want it to appear and stop, just be there. Great. So it looks like all we need to do is update this parameter from the script. So I have in my UI time up panel, I need a reference to my animator component. That's this component here. And this is the one that has a function that lets us change the parameters of the controller that this animator is using. So let's make a animator. Let's get a reference to that Unity component right in Awake. And when we set panel active, we're going to set the Boolean property is visible to whatever we get told to set to. So we're going to go to animator dot, and the function we want, which we could find in the, where am I? Where's my documentation? We could find in the documentation is a function called get bool, set bool, set float, get bool, get float, get int, set int, and so on. So we want to do a set bool because that property we made was of type bool. We have to give it a name, and we have to exactly type the same thing we typed before, and then a value, which will be the variable that we have right here. JetBrains Writer wants us to do that, but I'm not going to because I don't want to have to explain what I just did. Great. That was it. That was the one line of code we had to write. I lied. I said one line earlier. I forgot about actually getting the reference and storing it in a variable, but we could do it in one line if we really wanted to. That was a long way around of pretty arbitrary example. Like, I said 30 minutes. I said it'd take 15 minutes. Took me 20. But that's fine. But now we have an animation system built in. More importantly, we have panels that can be controlled in multiple different ways. We have panels that turn themselves off and on. We have panels that turn themselves off and on using an animation system. We have panels that talk to other components somewhere else. But as far as our panel manager is concerned, they all behave the same way, which is beautiful and very easy to work with. So let's test the game if we can win. Yep, at the finish line. And now I am ready to make it fun and add obstacles and learn about tile maps and maybe do that thing where the car goes off the road into the grass, it gets slower. And maybe add cars screeching noises, and a good engine noise is pretty tough. So lots to do to make this an actual game, but that's as much as we're doing in the videos here. We could do a countdown timer. What am I at? 50? Could I do a countdown timer in 8 minutes? I think I can though, but we're not going to. I will outline how you would. You'd have another panel called the countdown panel, and in the panel manager, you would in fact, when the state is countdown, you would turn on the countdown panel. Good so far. Then exactly like the HUD panel, you would have it talk to, but everything would be the same here for the countdown panel, except the race timer would be a different timer. It would be a countdown timer. And our race manager would have a second timer called countdown timer, and then we would start the countdown timer on Awake. We'd set that to be a new timer. Instead of starting the race, we would, countdown timer dot 3 seconds, whatever. And then here, if the state is equal to countdown, then we tick the countdown timer. And if the countdown timer's time is up, then we start the race. And then start race changes the state. And then we get to this. So we'd have like kind of this statement will be like copied and pasted, right? So that would be, we do the countdown timer to start the race. And then when we're racing, till we run out of time. Okay, let me just double check I didn't break it before putting that code up on GitHub for students to reference and get themselves caught up. If you got stuck in one of the parts, you could move on to another. Nice. All right, well, that's it for me and this video series. Like the other follow-along projects, this will be checked by looking at them in class. So please do put them on the appropriate computers so that I can look at them in class. All right. Goodbye.